Okay, so now we're going to work through all three of the arguments that you see on page 2 of this document, argument 4, 5, and 6. Remember, if you do not print this, you need to put only one argument on each page. If you're copying the arguments, it is highly recommended that you end at the same point on a given line. That will make it easier for you to follow the examples. And again, if you're having to copy this because you don't print this, you need to have one argument on each page in the top left-hand corner. Make sure that you're double spacing and giving yourself enough room to mark up the passage so that you can have good examples of what you're looking at and what you need to refer to. All right, so from now on, I'm just going to assume that anytime I tell you to do something, that you look back at your notes, that you attempt to do the item, and that you look back at your notes. If you feel like you're getting the hang of this, you could attempt to not look at your notes and do as directed, and then look at your notes. In other words, cut out the step of looking at your notes beforehand if you're getting comfortable with this and you think you know what you're doing, and look at your notes only after you do it to check your work. So right now I encourage you to focus on bracketing and numbering the statements and then checking your answer with mine. I'll no longer tell you or tell you to pause the video. I'll assume that you'll figure out when you need to pause the video to practice. Okay. So I'm not going to bracket and number this because it's a command. I looked at a lot of credible sources that explain the meaning of eulogize. That's definitely a statement. All of them said that the meaning of the word has something to do with giving high praise and or honoring someone. Definitely a statement. And I noticed that this sentence has another statement in it. George Floyd does not deserve any of that. So I still stand by my original conclusion. That was bad syntax. So I still stand by my original conclusion. That is that, where's the core of his statement? He should not have been given a eulogy. So we've got this one is statement 2, this one is statement 3, and this one is statement 4. Be really careful, guys. Be careful not to misstate multiple statements in one sentence, as I've already iterated. Okay, so if you've done that part, notice that, so if you've gotten this far, then go ahead and let's try to label premises and conclusions. So when I first start looking at this passage, I don't know what this is. But then when I read statement 2, they're telling me about some research that they've done that informs how they're using the word eulogy. And here they're telling us they've done a lot. So maybe they want to show us that not only do they have a specific meaning of a word, but they've done a lot of research to inform how they define that word. Then they've got another statement that George Floyd does not deserve any of that, and of course what they're talking about is something that has to do with the definition that they cite, or that they go over. The only indicator word that I can make use of, and remember the Soft Talk module gave you strategy, it said look for indicator words. The only indicator word that I have that is probably telling me something is coming in terms of argument statements is so. So typically tells me a what is coming, a conclusion. Since we're analyzing only simple arguments, we know there's only one conclusion. When I use my college level reading skills, I realize that statements 1, 2, and 3 are providing premises. Okay, so then, what is the pattern here? Oh, and notice that I did not bracket the conclusion indicator. And actually, the conclusion indicator has 2 instances of a conclusion indicator. It has so, plus it has conclusion. But I didn't bracket that. I'm just bracketing the core of the statement that is the actual conclusion. Make sure you know the difference between a premise indicator and the actual statement that is the actual part that is the actual premise, and the difference between a conclusion indicator and the part of the statement that provides the actual statement functioning actually as a conclusion. Okay, let's do the pattern. So some of you might be tempted to do this. That is not how we're going to do patterns in this class. You learned about 3 kinds in the module. Premise, conclusion, conclusion, premise, premise, conclusion, premise. You should only write 1 P. A premise is followed by conclusion. So let's go to our notes. So I want you to add something. Pattern, okay? So let's add something to pattern. We're going to try to squeeze it in right here. Let's see. Oh, use dashes. Okay, so we know what dashes mean. And then maybe do a semicolon here, or squeeze it in here. P equals at least one premise. So use dash between the premises and the conclusions when doing the pattern. P will mean at least one premise for the pattern. So you might want to add to your notes, or you could add to your warnings here, that when you're doing the pattern, whenever you have consecutive premises, you'll still use only one P to represent the argument pattern. So since P equals at least one premise, we know that there could just be one or more than one. So this captures the pattern in this argument. Even though there are three premises, we use only one P to say at least one premise. What about the diagram? So let's look at the diagram. The diagram is going to say S1, a premise. What is the sign for working jointly together with another statement? Plus. Works with S2, another premise. Works with what? Another S3, another premise. Make sure you're using the space blank. We'll need it later. All of these statements are working jointly. What is the symbol that represents in support of from our definition for argument? Downward arrow. We started with the premises in the diagram. Just so happens that the ordinary argument also starts with the premises. S for the what? Conclusion. Okay, so it's only coincidence that the pattern of the argument begins with premises and ends with the conclusion, and so the diagram does as well. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next argument. Go ahead and bracket and number the statements. So we have, and actually, I have more to say about this. Okay, so they're just giving us context. They're letting us know that they're going to say something about the topic. See if you can follow this argument, which supports the one I just presented. A little space is needed there. Okay, so that's a command. So, and actually, I have more to say about this. That's a statement. They're making a claim about reality. See if you can follow. That's a command, so we wouldn't bracket that. It goes like this. They're just telling us, hey, here it comes. They're setting up their argument, the reasoning that's coming. It's still a statement. Anyone who is a convicted criminal with at least one violent offense is not worthy of praise nor honors. Ah, that's definitely a statement. Sometimes I forget to number as I go along, but that doesn't matter as long as your end product has the numbering and the bracketing. Ooh, I forgot to emphasize that your argument markup and the examples that I'm giving you must inform any graded work you do when I tell you to clarify an argument, that is to do argument analysis and more. You cannot change the rules or the punctuation or the symbols. You must use brackets, not braces. You must use brackets, not parentheses. So you might want to add that to your warnings. Do not change the markup symbols or rules when marking up an argument and clarifying it. For example, use brackets to isolate statements. Do not use any other punctuation mark. Do not use parentheses. Do not use braces. All right, so let me take a step back and say the reason why I'm so adamant about this is because I don't have time to think about what your personal symbols or ways of marking up an argument mean. I need to be as objective as possible, and I need to be efficient because I have so many students. Therefore, it helps to have a common set of conventions that we all apply the same way. Okay, let's continue. He should have been eulogized. Let's see. Okay, and actually in this example, I meant to say he should not have been eulogized. So add that. That's just a typo on my part. He should not have been eulogized. So that is a statement right there. Did you miss that one? A lot of times students will miss that there are two statements, and one common way that they do that is when you have the conclusion in the same sentence as a premise, and one of those statements is very short. So we have, he should not have been eulogized, but did you get that they're giving another statement? The core of which is right here, statement 5. Okay, so now I want you to try to label the premises and the conclusion, remembering that we're working with simple arguments. Statement 1 is merely contextual, so it should not be labeled as anything, but it should definitely be bracketed and numbered. Of course, this doesn't get a label because it's not a statement. That's why it's not bracketed or numbered. This just says, here comes the way I want to present my ideas. It's not functioning as a premise or a conclusion, so it doesn't get labeled. 3, however, is different. Look at 4. It says hence. In other words, they think something follows from something else. What they think 4 follows from, of course, is 3. And of course, we know hence typically functions as what kind of indicator? Conclusion indicator. So by using my college level reading skills, I can think that maybe this is a premise. I'm going to go ahead and read the rest in light of the fact that, so I'm looking at my list of premise and conclusion indicators and I realize, hey, this is probably a premise. So again, think about how I am demonstrating how to apply the strategy that was given to you in the Soft Talk module on how to analyze the parts of an argument. I'm demonstrating and helping you practice doing what you read about. So using my reading skills, my developing analytical skills, I realize, hey, these 2 things are functioning as a premise and this as a conclusion. Therefore, I've labeled what I need. Notice that I leave out the conclusion indicator and I've left out the premise indicator. So the pattern for this would be P, C, P. The only time you will have 2 P's is when you have a conclusion in the middle of some premises. Even if you had 2 premises above this, before this conclusion, you still write only 1 P for the reasons given when I covered this argument. All right, so let's go ahead and do the diagram. So we've got statement 3, a premise, works together with statement what? 5, another premise, in support of another statement 4, the conclusion. So notice that the first statement does not begin with 1. You go by, where is the statement in here? Where's the first premise? It's right here. It's statement 3. So it has to be S3. Don't tell yourself that it has to be S1. It's S3. And then don't tell yourself next must be S4. No, S4 is the conclusion. And we know in our diagrams, we put the premises first and then the conclusion last. That's why we have S5 and then we have S4. Okay, one more argument. Let's go ahead and analyze it. I realize that I realize you have reasons for thinking that. Okay, but I don't think it is unreasonable to say that eulogizing him was at least morally permissible. Okay, so I realize you have your reasons for thinking that. That's a statement. But I don't think, here's another statement, it is unreasonable to say that eulogizing him was at least morally permissible because, here's another statement, 3, doing so serves to honor infinite worth and dignity of a person who passed on. And here we should probably add the. You can make little adjustments when analyzing argument. You can make tiny adjustments that have to do with typos and syntax. That's perfectly fine because you're not majorly changing in any substantive way what's actually going on in the argument. Now notice, it might have been hard to see this, but what? There's another statement. Remember the warning I gave you up here. Sometimes when the statement is very short, very curt, it's hard to capture it. So again, you have to switch from your impulsive, fast thinking, and I don't mean impulsive in a derogative or demeaning way. We all have impulsive thinking, quick thinking, fast thinking. You have to apply intellectual perseverance and slow down. You have to show, using intellectual courage and empathy, deliberate, sustained focus and effort. You have to be very attentive and careful with what you're reading through. Otherwise, you'll miss something. So you might have done that here. I just don't understand how you don't get this. That's a statement. Notice that in this one sentence here, from statements 1 through 3, they're all in one sentence. Be really careful, be focused, be attentive, and whatnot. Now it's time to label. I really do hope that you're pausing the video The thing about pausing the video is to elaborate and actually bring up something new is that you have to create neural pathways using the new brain cells you've developed with the new lessons, the what, the definitions, the rules, the demonstrations. Neural pathways are like meadows, a path in the meadow. Imagine a meadow with tall grass. You walk through it once and you can see where you walk through. But if no one else ever walks that path again, then the pathway disappears. It's inconceivable. It's like it never existed, like you never walked through it. That's what is going on. What I'm trying to do here with the practice and the coaching video and the demonstrations is create a neural pathway through the meadow of your brain's physiology. If you do not constantly practice, then you lose what you learned initially. So the more you practice, the deeper and more permanent you make the neural pathway in the meadow of your intelligence, if you will. So please make sure you're pausing the video. Another thing I want to add that I should have said at the beginning, learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are great. Michael Jordan said, I fail, therefore I succeed. Other people say failure is another word for learning. The only time a mistake or a failure is bad is when you ignore it, you refuse to acknowledge it, and you don't learn from it. So here's another thing that you can do that's optional throughout the semester, is you could create a list of mistakes, okay? You could even say mistakes to learn from. So here, then you do like 3 columns. So here you would write down the mistake I made. So you would write down the mistake and give the example. Here you would give me the reason, or yourself, why did I make this mistake? I wasn't focused. I didn't really understand the definition. I didn't look back at my notes. And then here could be, I bracketed something that's not a statement, okay? Then here you could give the statement that you shouldn't have bracketed and then shown that it shouldn't have been bracketed by not bracketing. Then what you can do is you can learn and grow from these mistakes and errors. And each time you analyze an argument, each time you do something for class, review your mistakes, recall your mistakes, and try not to make them again. That's optional. Okay, so we're almost done with this video. Let's just wrap up this argument. Let's look for premises and conclusions. So I realize you have your reasons for thinking that. That's just acknowledging that somebody thinks that something. That does nothing to support or attack anybody or anything. So it's neither a premise or a conclusion. But here we have, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that eulogizing him was at least morally permissible. Could be something, not sure. But then they say, because doing so serves to honor, and actually that should come over here, honor the infinite worth and dignity of a person who passed on. Because typically, but not always, functions as a what? A premise. So we're going to write premise. So we look at the syntax and the organization of statements and ideas in the sentence, and we realize that this is being given as a reason in support of what? Statement 2. So if 3 is a premise in support of statement 2, another statement, that means that this is likely to be a conclusion. And notice that they're not done giving their reasoning. Because has scope over statement 3, but we see it also has scope over statement 4, because it's to say because this statement and this statement. Now here and when we read this, we realize that there's another statement. It's not just a list like I want apples, oranges, and bananas. In that sentence, and is not saying here comes another reason or here comes another statement. It's just saying here's another item in my list. Okay, so it turns out that this is a premise as well. This should not be labeled as anything. They're just talking about their attitude towards the inability for someone to see things from their point of view. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, when it comes to intellectual empathy, a lot of people don't understand this. Expressing intellectual empathy, first of all of this, whenever you can identify the premises and the conclusions, this is evidence of intellectual empathy, whether or not you agree with the arguments. But just because you practice intellectual empathy by showing what the premises and the conclusions are of someone else's argument, doesn't mean that you have to accept the argument. So you can show intellectual empathy. All that means is you understand where they're coming from intellectually, rationally, conceptually. It does not mean that you have to accept as true or compelling or adopt their views. That's so important. I've had students think that. Okay, we're almost done with this video. Let's go ahead and wrap up. We've got as the pattern conclusion. Is this the correct answer? No. Remember what I told you to write down in your notes and what I said about P and what it means? There's a conclusion followed by at least one premise. And then the diagram would be what? S3, that's where our first premise is, and we always start with the premises, is working together with this one. Oh, I forgot to number that one. My number's off. Did you capture that? 4. This is 5. So S3, a premise, works together. What's the sign for that? Symbol, plus. S4, another premise. What else do we do with this? Underline it. What means in support of? Downward arrow. And then we write what? S2, the conclusion.